All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. We've got a really fascinating topic today.
Yeah, looking forward to this one.
This one's been on our radar. We've gotten a ton of requests about this, and it's something that we've been kind of tracking ourselves. We're going to be diving deep into Japan's population, and more specifically, its shrinking population.
Right. It's a big one.
It is a big one, and I think it's something that a lot of people hear about, but don't really understand the full context.
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
going to try to lay that out here today, just to give you an idea of just how significant this is. Imagine a country where there are more adult diapers sold than baby diapers.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of paints a picture, right?
Yeah, it's striking.
Yeah, and that's Japan. Japan's population is actually shrinking by about 1 million people every year. So to put that in perspective, that's like an entire city just vanishing
Poof.
every year, gone.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of break it down into the causes. What's going on? Why is this happening? We're going to look at the potential consequences. And we're not just talking doom and gloom here. We're going to talk about the potential upsides and the potential downsides.
Right, because every coin has two sides, as they say.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And then we're going to look at some proposed solutions. What are people talking about doing about this? What measures are being considered? And then we'll kind of wrap it up with why some folks think that the government's not doing enough and maybe even what could be done differently. So to help guide us through this, we have, as always, our resident expert. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
So let's just dive right in. Let's start with the why. Why is Japan's population shrinking? What's going on?
Well, I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that, but based on what you sent me, it seems like it really boils down to three major things: low birth rates, traditional gender roles, and the country's immigration policies.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit, starting with those low birth rates. Why aren't people in Japan having as many kids as they used to?
Well, just imagine being a young person in Japan today. There's so much pressure, the cost of living is through the roof, and finding decent, affordable housing, it's a real struggle. Then you've got these long work hours, it's practically built into their culture. And trying to balance that with starting a family, I mean, that's just incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I've read a lot about the work culture in Japan. It's pretty intense, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that kind of ties into the whole traditional gender roles thing too. In Japan, there's still this very strong expectation that women will be the primary caregivers for children, which, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that choice if that's what someone wants, but the problem is it often limits women's career options.
Yeah, it's like you're being forced to choose between a career and having a family.
Exactly. And I mean, who wants to make that choice? So it's not surprising that a lot of people are just putting off having kids or maybe deciding not to have them at all. And then on top of that, you have the whole immigration piece.
Right. Japan's known for being very particular about immigration, let's say.
Yeah, Japan has this long history of being very culturally homogenous, and I think there's a genuine concern among some people about preserving that. So even though the country could really benefit from an influx of skilled workers, immigration remains quite limited.
So you have these three things: low birth rate, traditional gender roles, limited immigration, and it's like a perfect storm for, a shrinking population.
Exactly, and it's actually pretty fascinating when you think about it. All these things are kind of rooted in Japan's post-World War II economic boom. They relied on a huge homogeneous workforce to fuel their success, and it worked brilliantly for a long time.
Yeah, that makes sense. The model worked then, but now the world's different and it's kind of backfiring.
Exactly. What worked then isn't necessarily working now. Things have shifted.
Okay, so we've talked about the why. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the potential consequences. Now, before we get to all the doom and gloom, are there any potential upsides to having a smaller population?
Well, there could be. Think about it. Less density. A smaller population could actually lead to a better quality of life in some ways. Cities could become less crowded, more livable.
So no more packed trains during rush hour.
Exactly. And maybe it would even be easier to find affordable housing.
Well, that would be a nice change.
Right. And with fewer people competing for resources, there could be less strain on things like infrastructure and public services. Theoretically, it's possible that the average person could actually be better off economically with a smaller population.
Okay, so that's the optimistic view, right? But we have to talk about the potential downsides too.
Oh, absolutely. There are some very real concerns. The biggest one is the aging population. A shrinking workforce has to support a growing number of elderly people, and that puts a huge strain on the social safety net.
Right, because you have fewer people paying into things like pensions and healthcare.
Exactly. And then, imagine hospitals struggling to find enough nurses or doctors to care for an aging population. It's a recipe for trouble.
And this isn't just a domestic issue either, right? This could have global implications for Japan.
Oh, absolutely. Japan is a major economic power, and their shrinking population could definitely weaken their global standing. If there aren't enough young people entering the workforce, especially in key industries like technology and innovation, it'll be tough for them to stay competitive.
Right, because those are the industries that drive progress.
Exactly. So, yeah, the potential downsides are pretty significant.
Okay, so we've got a problem. We've got some potentially good things, some potentially bad things. What are the solutions here? What can be done to address this population decline?
Well, based on what we've been looking at, it seems like there are two main approaches being discussed: family-friendly policies and immigration reform.
All right, let's start with those family-friendly policies. What
Yeah.
kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, basically anything that makes it easier for people to have and raise children. Things like subsidized childcare, generous parental leave, flexible work arrangements, things that take some of the pressure off.
We've seen similar policies work in other countries, like in Scandinavia, right?
Yeah, for sure. Countries like Sweden and Denmark have implemented these kinds of policies, and they've seen some positive results.
But could that work in Japan, though? I mean, given what we talked about earlier with their work culture, I can't imagine it being easy to shift those deeply ingrained attitudes.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, the concept of karoshi, death from overwork, really illustrates how intense the work culture is in Japan. So yeah, changing those norms, it's not going to happen overnight. It would require a massive cultural shift.
So family-friendly policies might help, but they're not a guaranteed fix. What about immigration reform? Wouldn't opening the doors to more foreign workers help boost the population and, bring in some new talent and ideas?
It definitely could. But we have to remember the cultural context here. Japan has a strong sense of national identity and cultural heritage. For many people, large-scale immigration feels like a threat to that, like it would dilute their culture.
So it's a really sensitive issue. It's not just about economics, it's about identity.
Exactly.
So it sounds like Japan's in a tough spot. And from what I've read, a lot of people are pretty critical of the government's response so far. They're saying the government's been too slow to act, that they're dragging their feet, and it's making the problem worse.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense that the government has been hesitant to make bold decisions, maybe because they're worried about potential backlash. But, the longer they wait, the fewer options they'll have.
It's a tough situation,
Yeah.
for sure. It's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They're facing this huge demographic challenge with no easy answers, and the clock is ticking.
So, to sum it all up, Japan's facing a serious population problem with a whole bunch of complex causes and potential solutions, and none of them are simple.
Nope, no easy fixes here.
It's definitely a situation worth keeping an eye on, but, it also makes you think about the bigger picture, right? If Japan, a country known for its innovation and its ability to adapt, is struggling with this, what does it mean for the rest of the world? Because a lot of countries are starting to see similar demographic trends.
Right, and it's something we should all be paying attention to.
Absolutely. So that's our deep dive into Japan's population puzzle. It's a complicated issue, but hopefully this has given you a little more insight into what's going on.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure having you. And for all of you listening, thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into something else that's fascinating and important. Until then, keep exploring and stay curious.
Thank you for tuning in today, for listening in your own way, exploring with your open mind. In our dive, you'll treasures find mysteries untangled.